right, guys. Hey, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Peyton Jones. I'm here on behalf of New Breed Training, and I wanted to go ahead and just jump in today to our presentation of finding your missional fire. If you don't know what that is, a lot of church planners are trained to actually think, oh, you might hear some background noise here. Sorry about that. We're actually doing a little bit of filming today. So we just finished up a couple sessions for New Breed training, but developing your church's missional fire is what we want to chat about. Now, a lot of planners are trained to try to figure out what their missional sweet spot is. And there was a tool for this. And after a number of years training this for the Baptists, I remember just kind of feeling like, you know what, it's good. But I actually feel there's a way to train planters that's a little more true to the way it actually works on the ground. So we're going to walk through that a little bit. I am going to ask that my trusty assistant, Brooks Hammond, content director at New Breed, will move us on to the next slide. So here's the problem. A lot of leaders try to get their church to go on mission. They tell them what the mission is going to be. Like, for example, they'll tell them, hey guys, we're going to go do this, and we're going to go reach homeless, or we're going to go reach these kind of people. But they do it externally. It's like put upon them. They're not igniting their passion. People don't internally feel like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So trying to ignite your passion in others doesn't work. So imagine I'm really fired up for something, and I'm trying to tell a whole congregation that isn't about it. All I'm doing is I'm blowing my heat and my fire and my energy all over them. And you know what happens when fire meets ice, right? The fire wins. The fire always wins against ice, and the fire will melt the ice. The ice will not turn the fire cold. Leaders should mobilize all believers in their own passions. So what one of our major mistakes is I, as a leader, am trying to get everybody mobilized in my passion, right? In my fire. I have a fire. I know that I'm apostolic. I know I'm there to catalyze and mobilize others, but that's my passion. But look at what this scripture says. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So stop and think about that. Maturity means having all of these different gifts working together. And so when it says he gave the apostles, that's one type of fire. The prophets, that's another type of fire. The evangelists, another type of passion. And these are 5 different macro passions that exist in the church to build it up. So next slide. So first thing we need to do in order for you to find your missional fire is actually to do what we call planting from burden. So planting from burden means, and this is from Dhati Lewis. Dhati Lewis, he's got Blueprint Church. He wrote Boulevard Training. He was once upon a time my boss, very shortly, actually, for NAM. And he said that the key to church planning is to start from burden. Like, start by asking that question, what am I burdened from? The way that we used to do this was we used to ask people on our strike teams, or you might call them core teams, we call them gospel strike teams. We would literally throw down newspapers and have people look through them. And we would ask them, you know, what are you burdened for here? And that was our starting point. What are you burdened for? And we knew that not everybody was going to be burdened for the same thing. But if I can find their burden, that will lead me to their passion. Once I know what their passion is, I pretty much can figure out how the Holy Spirit's gifted them. So let's go to step 2. All right, number 2, take stock of your resources. Now, resources don't just mean money. Resources could be equipment. Like, for example, recently I heard about a church plant that's folding down. They have resources, they have equipment, and I want that for my church plant. So that's a huge resource. What that does is it means there's a bunch of things I don't have to buy now, right? But there's equipment. What kind of equipment do you have? Like, for example, if you want to minister to the homeless people, chances are you don't have a food kitchen if you're a church plant. Chances are you don't have a sock factory. Chances are you don't have, what's the other one? Let's see. Sorry, I'm just getting a text from my wife as this is happening. She says she can't be let in right now. So I'm going to tell you, Brooks. Sorry, guys. This is a real time. This is not pre-recorded. So Brooks is going to let her in. But all of your different resources, there's a bunch of different kinds of resources that you're going to need. Maybe you need a shower. That's what I was grasping for. There's trucks that you can buy that have built-in showers in them, right? Maybe you need a mobile home that houses your socks, that houses a food pantry. And so you need to invest in a mobile. Do you have that? Do you have a mobile home you've been trying to sell? Well, hey, maybe you could, or do you know someone who has one? All these things that are equipment are a big part of the equation. Like, if you don't have the equipment, then maybe that's not going to be where your sweet spot is, right? The other thing is people. So looking at what people do you have? If you're going to go reach young hip hop rave people, and you're thinking, man, we're just so burdened about the people going in and out of raves, and they get drunk, and then they get high, or they get inebriated, and then they get taken advantage of, and then they're sexually assaulted, and this is just breaking our hearts, destroying this generation. It's rotting their mind. They're up in institutions because they're taking bad stuff or fentanyl or what have you. But you only have a bunch of grandmas and grandpas. That might not be the ministry for you. Finances. How much money do you have in the bank? Like, these are all things you got to think. How much time? One thing that old people are great at that young people aren't, or young families at least, is time. Old people have a bunch of time. And then experiences. How much experience do you have? Like, do you have people in your midst who have worked at a homeless shelter? Every church plant I've been with has always had somebody who's worked at a homeless shelter. It's always funny how that works out. That's someone you want to grab hold of if you're going to be reaching homeless people. All right. Identify divine opportunities. Sometimes, and this is the one that when I used to look at the old models of how we would train planners to find their sweet spot, their missional focus, their whatever you want to call it. I call it missional fire. I noticed that when you were actually on the ground planting, what would actually happen is God, I mean, that's a joke there. Sometimes God wrecks all our fancy plans, but he does, right? The old joke that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Divine opportunities. Like, that's a big deal, divine opportunities, because what happens to us when we're planting is sometimes, like, maybe the mayor calls up and says, hey, we saw what you guys did in the community. We're calling together a bunch of church leaders. I can remember this happened to me in Wales. The mayor saw the stuff we were doing, and she was the mayor. They have boroughs in a large city. So she was the mayor of our borough. That's like your neighborhood. That's your Jerusalem. And she was like, look, I've called together 20 different churches from Anglican, Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, called all these churches together, independents, and we were the only church that responded to this call. And we formed this huge partnership. What she used to do is she used to give us all of the people in her district that were dying, that were in need of help. Like, she would just rack people up for us that needed volunteers or needed whatever, and we would just go take care of that for her in the city. And we loved it, and she loved it. And we'd say, hey, we promise you, there will be no pressure. Like, well, we may or may not let people know who we are, but that just depends. If it's appropriate, we might. We actually did this one thing called Men Who Eat Meat. And so I figured for all the landscaping stuff, like the heavy duty, like there was a woman that her back garden was like a giant cesspit of, rains every day there. And she was a single mom. And the mayor said, hey, there's this lady, let me tell you about her. It was almost like those dream home makeover shows. and we'd roll in with like 10 dudes and a backhoe, or a bobcat, and we'd say, oh, hey, we got some construction workers who can do this. But we called it men who eat meat. I promised the men, I said, if you come out and just give me your morning, by lunch I will feed you copious amounts of barbecued meat. And they love that. So that's what we would do, is we would just let them eat meat until they're going to pop at the end. We'd reward them. And it was a great way for us to laugh and to bond as men, which isn't bad for a young church plant. It was also a way for us to be Jesus, embody Jesus in that community by looking after the needs of others. And then lastly, it also helped meet the needs of people and build goodwill. But it was a divine opportunity. It wasn't something we set out to do. It was just kind of like Jesus standing, watching us fish, and suddenly going, hey, why don't you cast the net on the other side? And that became super helpful to us, because we just learned, like, it didn't matter how fancy our diagram was. It didn't matter our vision frame, our kingdom concept, or whatever it was, whatever tool we were using. We didn't have enough information. And the one you could never map out was that divine opportunities. We never had that. That was like, you just got to wait and see what God does. And part of the reason why there's a little flame here and why we call it missional fire is that's Moses minding his own freaking business, going, well, I guess I'm just going to shepherd over here. And God appearing in the burning bush and saying, hey, Moses, here you go. I got plans. I need you to come over here and do this. And Moses never saw it coming. Right? He knew he wanted to help his people, he just didn't know how. And God opened up a divine opportunity through that burning bush. So we want to have God point out to us. And again, that's just a wait and see. You don't wait to go on mission. You just start getting busy. That's how all that happened. We just started getting busy. But we knew that the divine opportunity, that's what we were going to focus on. That is what we focused on. So next slide. Okay. So because New Breed, all of our training is based on, the best way to put it is what training that we do is always focused on your team. So just know that when you're getting ready to train with New Breed, we're not going to train you. We're going to train your entire team. So one thing that we ask is that you as a team come together and you start asking certain questions. Like, one of the questions that we ask is, what burdens do we have? And notice that that's a we. It's not an I. Again, if you're going to start by asking the question, what burdens do I have? You're going right back to, hey, I'm apostolic. My burden is coming from a very different place than what yours might be, right? If I've got an APES team, the prophetic burdens are going to be very different than the other one. So we've got the burdens that we have as a team. And by the way, one of the things I point out, we'll probably do something on this in future. The apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, those are macro giftings. There's also micro gifts. Micro gifts are the smaller, the smaller giftings that, they may or may not group within those bigger buckets of the APES. I personally think they do. We're actually doing a little bit of work on that right now. But what burdens do we have? And this goes back to why APES training is so important in New Breed. We believe that the APES is actually the complete burden of Jesus. We don't think that you're going to have the right burden. You're going to have a piece of what God's burden is. God burdened apostolically or missionally? Yeah. Is God burdened that his people experience the presence and power of the Holy Spirit? Yeah. Is God burdened that people are romanced and wooed by the gospel? Yeah. Is God burdened that people know that Christ is the good shepherd who cares for his sheep and knows them by name and protects them and feeds them and leads them in a green pasture? Yeah. Is God burdened that people understand the deeper doctrines and teachings of God, so that they don't screw their life up because their bad thinking is leading to bad living, but instead they can know the truth and the truth will set them free? Yeah. Okay, great. No more questions. What burdens do we have? Write those down. So we've got a tool that goes with today's webinar that actually allows you to do that, to work through that and ask the question, what burdens do we have as a team? And list them out. And your team may be your APES strike team, but as outlined in church plantology, but also you might have a bigger team. So I do this with my strike team, but then I do it also with the bigger, all of the non-leaders on my strike team as well. So there we go. All right, there it is. What resources do we have? So we've got to look at our resources again. And again, I'm not going to go over that. I went pretty deep on that. Just take stock and try to match them up with the burdens. Like, what resources go with these burdens? Like, don't sit there and go, well, we got a Mr. Coffee Maker. And, like if it's pertaining to the burden, you start with the burden, start saying, well, which resources go with these burdens? Okay, next one. Finally, what divine opportunities do we have? Now, it might be in the beginning, you don't have this yet, but you're looking for them. Now, if you don't have these, if you do, and they've been happening, I don't know if you're like me, if you're just not paying attention to what God is often saying to you or pointing you to, yeah, it's not you. It's not only you. This is Knuckleheads Anonymous. I think we all do this. I have friends that are prophetic. They'll occasionally call me up and give me a word of prophecy, and I'll be like, huh, that's cool. And they'll remind me, and they'll come back and say they don't. I've got one guy in particular, he reminds me of them, and they are so spot on. They're amazing that I now start really paying attention to them, because sometimes I realize God is actually talking to me way before I'm paying attention. And that's a little embarrassing. But also too, the divine opportunities, things may be happening that you're just not recognizing. And that's super important. But if nothing has happened, right, it's kind of like Elijah, it says he was a man like us and he prayed by faith. Nothing happened on that. So what I was going to say is he kept praying, and then a cloud appeared. It says the size of a man's hand. So when that happened, he kept sending his servant out, keep looking, keep looking. So what you want to do here is you want to keep looking at what's happening, right? The divine opportunity may not have happened yet. So you're going to continually send your people out, keep looking, keep looking. And meanwhile, you're praying into it at the same time. All right. Lastly, when you come to the end of these, you're going to actually look at the commonalities. So what you're looking for, you're not just looking for one. You want to look at the different burdens. You start with the burdens. And I like to see how I've used the red circles. I like to take the burdens on the left and assign each burden a different color. And I actually learned this from Mac Lake, who is a genius at this. Guy's a master trainer. But you take the red burden. I didn't learn this model, by the way. I just learned the circling things and finding commonalities with Sharpies from him. He's one of the best coaches out there, and you can go to Mac Lake online and check him out. I owe him a ton, and he's got some good stuff. But he will circle things. So I'll take a blue marker, a green marker, a red marker. Don't use black because you're writing all this in black. But then you want to be able to visibly look and see, like, let's say I circle something in a red marker on my burdens. There might be 6 resources I have that go with that. There might be divine opportunities. There might be 1 or 2. There might be 0. But you want to roll with the one initially where you've got contact on all 3 of those. So if you're reds, you don't get 3. It's kind of like a slot machine. All 3 don't line up. Okay, we're waiting then on that. Wait until you hit the jackpot with all 3 of the same. Okay, next one. Okay, and so now you're going to narrow each category down to the core. You're going to transfer that information. And this piece of paper is in the tool. You actually would take each burden. So this one might be burden number 1, right? Homeless people. And then you list all the resources that pertain to that burden. So once you've done the hard work of circling all these and getting them all together, you can do those on giant Post-its. You transfer them to a form like this. And then what you do at the bottom is you write out your missional fire. And this can be kind of like a paragraph. It can be what conclusion led you to it. You write out your burden, what you have, what resources you have, what resources you need. And then lastly, where you've seen the activity of God already in this. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's kind of like a vision statement right there, right? I mean, that'll preach, that'll sell, right? You can reproduce that. You can communicate that to people. So now when you're standing up and you're talking to people and you're saying, "Hey, everybody, here's your this is the missional fire that we have right now." Obviously, there's probably like 2,000 needs that your city has. You can't reach them all. So what you do then is you actually move your people into, and don't worry, when you do this broader in the church, you're going to get so many different people saying different things. What you actually want to do is you want to keep the ones that you didn't, maybe you had a burden but you didn't really have resources or divine. You want to keep those. I keep them in a folder, and I would have them kind of chronologically, because what's going to happen is as you engage on those first two burdens, and you're finding your missional fire, other people are going to come to faith, and the Lord is going to add people that come bringing gifts and burdens and resources and even divine opportunities. Like, for example, I'll just tell you a quick story how this worked. There was one year for us where we were getting ready. I was actually leaving Refuge Long Beach. And Anna and I had been there for a number of years, and we always did this big thing. It was inner city, urban, and we would always do pictures of Santa, because we're like, nobody can afford pictures of Santa, and that's really cool to have with your kids. So, and all the people that were mad about it, who were like, "Oh, pictures of Santa, that's not about Jesus," we'd say, "That's right, it's about Santa. Next question." And they'd be like, "Oh, well, isn't that?" Nope, because we preach Christ here every week. But this is fun. This is about kids. This is yada yada. And we would just kind of say, "Hey, if that offends you, you're going to be really offended when you come to church and you see the two lesbians in our congregation, or the transgender prostitute that's coming to hear the gospel straight after work." And because there's all these people, we're reaching people like hardcore here, and it is as frontline as you get. So yeah, Santa's the least of our problems. So, but what happened is we would do that kind of stuff. We'd have giant gift exchanges. We have cookie parties. And I mean, we would get hundreds and hundreds of people showing up to this thing. It was massive, and we had so much fun doing it. So the year I left, I was really backing out of all this stuff, trying to really make sure the team did it. And nobody was good at administration. That's definitely a resource you need. But what happened was everybody was like, "Hey, can we?" So I asked them. I said, "Hey, you guys, what are you going to do for Christmas?" And they go, "Well, we haven't really thought about it. It was October. It's this time of year." And I said, "Guys, if you haven't thought about Christmas," because I'm a big believer in big days, like in the New Testament, right? If you read John's Gospel, it's the most evangelistic book. Almost all this big stuff that Jesus did centered around a big day, like the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Passover. John keeps telling us during the feast of this, Jesus goes up to Jerusalem. Jesus harnesses big days. So I have no problem harnessing big days. That's when you can ride that gospel donkey into Jerusalem, right? That's a big deal. That was another one, right? So Pentecost of Spirit just happened to drop on a big day, right? Like these were all big things that God purposefully did on big days. So I said, "Look, guys, this is the time where people are most willing to come to church. More people are willing. The statistic is something like people are 5 or 6 more times willing to come to church on Christmas or Easter than any other time during the year." And 85% of people said if they were asked, they'd say yes any other time of the year. So I'm like, dude, this is. So I told the team, I said, "Look, if you don't do something for Christmas and Easter, that's just a sin, because you knowing what you know and knowing people's response, particularly here at this church, I'm on my way out. I'm not going to do it. But if you guys don't do something, you're blowing it big time." So guess what? They said, well, one of them asked, what should I do? I just got put in charge of this. And I'm like, look, go down to Starbucks, go to the high school. We're directly across the street. Those of you that have seen the movie Freedom Riders, or is it Freedom Riders? I think it's Freedom Riders with Hilary Swank, where she goes in the inner. That was our school, right across the street was the school that we're at. Lots of shootings, rough neighborhood, yada yada. So we ended up just saying, look, just go to that school, talk to him, tell him that we're going to do a toy drive with Starbucks. So we wanted this like triumvirate. We want to do this toy drive. So we went into Starbucks. They were overjoyed. They're like, really? You're going to do something cool? Like, we have a toy drive. Want to join ours? Yes, we do. And we're going to go talk to the admins at the school and have them bring toys over. We're going to help distribute them. And they were like, wow, that's cool. So that's what we did. Well, guess what? One of the places that we found one of our leaders, just as a divine opportunity, he just happened to be talking to a lady who is super involved in rave ministry. I didn't make that up out of thin air. There's a ministry called Plur, and one of the ladies heavily involved with that actually had a women and children's shelter in Long Beach, maybe about a mile or two from our church plant. And we said, hey, why don't we give a lot of the toys and things like that to these kids? These kids are going through just absolute hell. Their family just broke up. So I know this is a long story. Sorry about that. But it was amazing. All these women at the shelter started coming to faith, right? The church established a relationship. The lady said, hey, we actually, for the shelter, have a bus. And I mean, you guys seem like the kind of church like our people would actually go to. Are you cool? Because we're like, hey, we have everything, man. We got addicts, we got prostitutes, we got this and that. And we look after, we protect our people, we protect the vulnerable. Sure enough, that happened. God opened up a divine opportunity. That became a huge part of the ministry of that church. Literally overnight, I think the children's ministry went from something like 15 to 50. And that was pretty rad. So then we needed more resources. So, but, and that led to new burdens. So, you know, look how that works. So anyways, all right, next. Okay, no more slides, just back to ugly face. So here's the thing that we're really wanting. We have a part 2 of this webinar that we're going to throw another time and another tool. But at this point, what we want to do is grab your questions, grab any things that you're thinking about. If there's anything that sparked you, anything that you want to throw at us question-wise. At first, I think we'll try to keep them somewhat related. You can drop your question in the chat if you want me to answer any, and then we'll do that. So that's kind of the presentation, really to give you a tool so that you don't end up kind of off balance or off center. So you don't end up actually trying to force people, like taking a blowtorch to a cube of ice. So throw me out some questions and we will answer them for you. Just go ahead and hit the chat and drop a question in there and we will get to them. It's probably good I was on mute just then. I actually said that my wife asked me why I'm such a handsome devil, but I didn't feel that was suitable, so I was sharing that. But what is your advice on mission for a small church, not a plant, but is being revitalized in Los Angeles, who are geographically spread out? We all live 5 to 10 miles from each other, which in LA is far. You know, it's so funny that you say that. That is true. In an urban context, local is considered anywhere within a 5-minute walking radius, particularly when you get uber urban or uber downtown, because everybody walks or takes public transport. So yeah, that is an issue. So when your people, so let me see if I can understand this. What you're saying is we're in a church revitalizing. It's a small church. We're revitalizing, but we're spread out. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be where you live necessarily. Like I would say, in the case of that women's children's shelter, what happened for them is when they adopted that. And by the way, I would guarantee almost any women's children's shelter in your city is probably somewhat neglected. I didn't mean this to be the women children's shelter hour, but I would guarantee they're probably neglected. The first thing you got to do is really vet your people, but have a like a what I would call a cog, or what other people might call a micro church, or an organic church. Have a team that goes there and loves on them, just spends time. One of our people would go there, and the husband would play with the kids. And again, he was one of the leaders. His name was Chris Langham. He's the founder of Through the Word. He's one of my best friends. I trust him with my own kids. I don't trust hardly anyone with my own kids, but they would go in there, and she would lead a Bible study, and these things were like very conversational, and they would call her up, and she would take him out on errands and stuff like that. But most women in children's shelters are very neglected, so you could actually adopt one. And once you start kind of pulling on that thread, you start realizing this stuff, there's a lot more here in this city than we ever realized. Andrew and I last Sunday, because we've been really working through like community gardens and what does that look like? We're planting a family of micro churches called the Garden. I mean, not the Garden, called the Abbey. And if you know anything about an abbey is it's like a monk cloister, but they're missional monks. And so to us, it just embodies all the APES, but they would plant a garden to share with the community. And so I'm getting old, and I'm starting to think about gardening a lot. And Andrea is a much better gardener than I am. But we, it was her idea. I mean, her best friend is a gardener for a master gardener for San Diego, and I just kind of went along, just going, let's check this out. But we went on Sunday to this festival. It was for the Feast of Tabernacles, which was last weekend, and Sukkot, which is the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles, and so we went out there, and it was amazing just watching Jewish people bring that into the community. And we were like, wow. So we're always looking at different ways. Now, everybody on our team right now isn't going to want to go become master gardeners, but that's our burden. Because once you get master gardener status, and you have to go train for 6 months, and that we've applied, they rejected us first round, but they say that's normal. But you can go into prisons, I mean, the world's your oyster. There's far more brokenness than your little church plant is going to be able to handle. But for a church like that that's spread out, your focal points are going to really be able to be used that way. So, your focal points are going to be you go where the people are, right? That is one of the key things of mission, is you go where they are. It's not often they come to you. So, and I'm just looking at all these questions. We will get to these. I just saw Jamie at the bottom, and sorry to take this out of order, but that really caught my attention. Any insights on applying this in rural communities? I'm in Mid-Coast Maine. Jamie, Andrew and I were in Lampeter, Wales, which hosts the third oldest university on the planet. It was Oxford and Cambridge. And then Trinity St. David's was actually its name. And it was the third. It had a seminary. All of those started with seminaries. But that town was rural. It was this university town out in the middle of nowhere. All of the people didn't make it into Oxford went into there. So it was kind of funny, and they were weird. But I was going to say that it was a rural community. And what I noticed was, in order to win the community, you had to ingrain yourself with the establishments of the community in a rural setting. So like for me, this is funny. I became a firefighter. And Andrea worked in this cafe that was a hub to the community. So we right away ingrained ourselves into, because we were always bivocational, we ingrained ourselves into the places where trust was important, where trust was already had. And we didn't know what we were doing at the time. I would say most of the Kung Fu that I've done is like Kung Fu Panda, where I'm not a skilled martial artist. I just bounce all over the place and ends up knocking the villains out. But I'm usually fumbling and bumbling my way through mission. And that's how it works. And so, yeah, I became a firefighter in the church that we joined, because we did accidentally plant out of there. We did these Sunday evening things in a community center and ended up really becoming a church plant unbeknownst to us, that I write about in church plantology. But in the morning, we joined this church. Anna and I became ministers there, and we started ministering. And the funny thing is, one of the elder's wife there, she was a nurse in the surgery. So she again was in a position of trust. You got to keep that trust. That's the thing. You can't just be a moron once you're in there. You got to actually, you got to be a good witness too. But I would say anything to do with the rural community, ingrain yourself. One last thing that I would say about that is, we actually got really tight. We lived in a village just outside of the town. We got really tied in with this one village. We just, if the village was doing something like caroling, we joined in, not as a church, just as a couple. We wanted them to get to know us. Not ever, the whole church didn't live in the village, but if they went Christmas caroling, and they weren't Christian, they were just, I think there were like two Christian. I think our neighbors were Christians. We didn't know it at first. And, but a lot of people on our street started respecting us. A couple of them came to church. Some of them got saved. And so I would just say, really end up, joining in with the rhythms of your community too. If they're having an art show, through their first art show, we helped, we did it. And so that kind of stuff, we just joined into what the village was doing. We started shopping at the village shop, which was like 1.5 times more expensive. But Andrew and I walk up there, we'd buy stuff just to support the local village shop a mile down the road from us at the turnpike. So stupid things like that make a big difference in a rural community. So I once coached a planting couple as well who were in a rural community. There was an established church there that they came in, that they acquired as a church plant because the old church was dying. And when they came in, they were going to not use the chapel and build a new building. And the townspeople got really upset. And I coached them and said, don't do that. They're worried that you're going to demolish that and build a new one. Don't do that. Actually keep that as a wedding chapel. People got married. In fact, that was so many people have been buried. I said, guys, if you're going to do this right, you're going to keep that, and you're going to connect to the history of the past, and still, have your little thing over there, but you need to keep that. That's actually your missional lighthouse there. That's going to be a beacon for your entire community. Like, that brings people in, start doing their weddings and funerals for free. Because they felt the church before actually had a lot of ill will because of how it had treated the community. So like, we're going to bulldoze that. And I'm like, no, your goodwill now is you just open up the doors. You do weddings and funerals to local residents in that community for free. And you reestablish who you are, but you don't tear down a landmark that's important to them. So again, I'm not an expert on rural things, but I have lived in rural settings and church planted on accident. So there we go. Okay. Can your burden be consistent? This is Felix's question. Can your burden be consistent with the burden of the place where you're doing the church plant? Yes. I'm wondering if you're saying, can the burden be inconsistent? If it is, this is going to be probably the answer no one wants to hear. If it is, you don't, if your burden's inconsistent, then with your community, you move, right? That's a sign that God's calling you to another community. So, but if it is consistent, hey, that's great. But if it's inconsistent, it's time to go. So Dwell Church says, we've been attempting to encourage our people to get involved in their own neighborhoods, but that hasn't been very successful. So, okay, so that Dwell Church, that's a good pointer there. One of the things that I would say to that is, for Andrew and I, we're apostolic. So what we would kind of tend to do is we would go into that neighborhood, and rather than having them start it up, apostolically, Andrew and I would start it. And I usually had an 8-week runway where, like, the first night I would do everything. And then the second night, I'd say, hey, why don't you do communion? Third night, I'd say, why don't you do the devotional and communion? Fourth night, I'd say, why don't you do the devotional, communion, and lead us in prayer? And each week, I would give them something more, just one little teeny thing. Then I would say, hey, why don't you team teach with me? You do 10 minutes. I'll do 10 minutes and we'll, or maybe it was 5 and 15 because you keep it shorter for discussion. Why don't you lead discussion and I'll watch? So each week I would add it on, and I had worked it out that I could do, by the time 8 weeks had expired, they were proficient, and I would just add. And each week I would take one thing off my plate, add one thing to theirs. So I would say having a runway for people to learn how to lead those groups is really important. Like, do it for them. Start it. See yourself as like the catalyst. Don't just give it to them. And Rick Warren did this, by the way. Rick Warren used to just hand people back in the 80s and 90s a videotape, a VHS tape. If you can put this in your VCR and you can show this to people and you can lead a discussion, you can host a home group. And he would do it for 8 weeks only, right? He'd say 8 weeks. That was it. It was an 8-week thing. You can get people to also run things for a shorter time. So if you wanted people to do it, have them do it for 8 weeks. Don't have them do it like most of us start something up and it runs forever, right? And then people go, oh, I can't do that. But you could do it seasonally in the summer, when the kids are out of school, or, you could have them start something for 8 weeks. And the right people get hooked. This was really shocking to me. I accidentally, again, I do things accidentally. I was speaking at the Exponential Conference one year, and I went to the speaker's dinner and sat in the back. I came late, and I sat in the back, and I sat at this table and like went, oh crap, because I realized I was sitting right next to Rick Warren. And I said, oh, I'm at the wrong table. I'm sorry. And he said, no, brother, you're at just the right table. For 3.5 hours, he let me pick his brain. And I was asking him about this kind of stuff. And he said, literally, I have found my best church planners by just encouraging people to start 8-week VHS Bible studies. And he goes, over the years, it's, we've moved on from VHS, but he said, that's the best methodology. If I can just find people that never saw themselves as leaders and just get them willing to host and see if they have that hospitality gift. He goes, it's like, 50% of them that we start, they don't continue, but he goes, but if you're starting 200 a year like we were, and 100 of them took, and next year you start at 200 more and 100 of those stayed, he goes, do the math. After a while, it becomes kind of a big deal. And I was like, wow. So put that on smaller notes. Let's say this year you start 5 and 2 of them stay. The next year you start 5 and 2 of them stay. This is what I've noticed with groups like this too. People bring their friends, they get saved, they stay, the church grows. So I actually really like the idea. This is why microchurch is kind of taking off, because in these smaller little groups, relationship is really strong. And we would always tell people we're back to front church. In the small groups or home groups, that was the real church. That's where God really grew. Sunday was mission, but that's a whole nother conversation. But we always saw that the magic, we would say, this is where the magic happens, to quote MTV. It's a little bit off color, but that's what we would say about our home groups. So, okay. Brooks is putting your takeaways on there. Michelle says, we just got off a flight, so I joined late. Will this be available for watching later too? It will now. So we'll, for those of you that are in New Breed, you're part of our membership. You can get this by going into our Mighty Networks. If you're not a part of our membership, we are going to be opening up our membership for free before too much longer. It'll be a suggested donation. We don't want to charge people. I was a poor missionary for years. We do, though, still need to keep the lights turned on. We keep doing stuff for free. That's our heart. We're actually in 46 different countries right now because we keep giving stuff for free. And that's a big deal. And as a once upon a time very poor missionary who couldn't afford to go to summit conferences or whatever they were, I never got to go to that stuff. And so New Breed has really tried to give that stuff out. So you can knock on our door at New Breed. If you can't afford the membership, just let us know. If you can, hey, consider it a donation. We're going to actually make it a donation before too long. Right now, it's just a straight membership fee, but we're actually changing that. But yes, if you want to, anyone who registered for this, we will send it via email. But there's also the membership option. So, okay, cool. Let's see. Oh, Brooks already answered that. Look at that, sneaky devil. All right, so reposting questions for easy access. Let's see. What else do we got? What do you do if your resources don't match your vision? All right, well, that is a super good question. Um, One of the things that right away that you learn when you're on mission is there are people who will not go with you, but they will fund you. They will empower you. I remember being and it's the weirdest thing. People will join you and they'll go to work and they'll talk about what they did. Like when you're hardcore on mission, people are buzzing about it. They'll go to work. So we had this one guy. He was a partner at a building firm in the UK. He went and talked to the owner of the company, like the big owner. He was a small partner. The big owner had multiple companies. He was a multimillionaire. He heard about what we were doing and he was like, hey, and this has happened in every church plant. We were in urban Long Beach. We got a guy off the streets and one of our members worked at a muscle grill company, you know, like those high end barbecue grills. And their plant was in Huntington Beach. And he went and said, hey, would you mind if we had this guy, look, we vetted him, he's awesome. And the owner is a Christian. He said, can we help him get a job? He really wants to work. He's living in the park, but he is just about to get his apartment, but he needs work and he can't get a job because of such and such. And so they got him trained up to drive a forklift. This is one of a number of people that got off the streets through the ministry there. But he started driving a forklift. He works for that company even to this day. I ask about him every time I talk to this guy. He's still there. It's been 10 years. He's still there. He's still doing awesome. And he's still walking with Jesus. And, you know, but the owner was like, I remember having lunch with the owner, and the owner, again, a multimillionaire, looked at me and said, Peyton, if you keep producing life change, I will keep funding this. So what I would say is start reaching out for gospel partners. There's a really good book that I would recommend. I quote it in Church Plantology. It's called Gospel Patrons. The basic premise of the book is no major missiological advance has ever taken place in the world apart from a businessman who is equally burdened. So when you talk about burdens, to match your missional burden will be someone who has financial resources. And you've got to find them, and you've got to start praying to God, like, hey, find them for me. Whitfield had the Countess of Huntington, who was part of British nobility, and she would fund all the church plants. She actually planted 8 churches herself. Don't know what you think about that, but in New Breed, we don't got any problem with that. In church history, there's no problem with that. When the Holy Spirit really starts moving, women become extremely active, and they just go for it. And holding them back is just a sin. So, you know, it's amazing to us that looking today at what God has done in church history, when the kingdom of God outpaces the church and blows beyond the borders, the stuff that the people of God start doing is phenomenal. But his whole premise is that there's always going to be someone. So that's super exciting that you can have that. So yeah, you just need to partner. You need to partner with people that do have the resources. If that's your burden and divine opportunities are there, then you're gonna go out. So I fundraise. I don't like even today, like how I mentioned, like, hey, we're opening up that's a huge step of faith for us, right? So we're able to look at our donors and partners and saying, look, in the same way we're asking you to donate to us, we're taking a step of faith too, because it's a terrible business model to say, hey, you can have it for free, but we're not in business, we're in ministry. So that's kind of our model, is let's just do that. And right now, to be honest, it's only as we've been giving away every third course that we're like, okay, this is what God's doing. That's our divine opportunity. I spoke with a planner in Iran this morning who is working with underground church plants and training. And we were just like, hey, just take it and translate it all into Farsi. Just take it for the gospel. Like we don't want to make any money off this, right? We need funding to do what we do, but why should the people on the ground who are getting ready to lose their lives and are pouring all their finances into expanding the gospel, why should we charge them? And I can just tell you, like, just knowing my wife's on here, the number of stories where we didn't have food. My wife and I for 2 years ate potatoes, beans, and eggs and bread. So we learned to eat eggs and beans on toast. I remember coming back to them. Funny enough, you wouldn't think you'd lose weight on a diet with that many carbs, but I did. And I remember coming back to America and people saying, "Hey, what's your diet secret?" The Atkins diet was all the rage, and I just said, "Well, I don't eat very much." And they laughed, and at this time I'm working in a factory, Andrew's working in a clothes shop, like we're working, but we're in a really depressed area economically there, and our support was very low. And they would laugh, when I say, "Well, I don't eat much," and they say, "Ah, that's funny, poor missionary, ha ha." And then I would just, like, "Oh, I really don't eat that much." And I probably shouldn't be telling you this story, but it just does go back, like, how Paul said, like, "Hey, I've known what it is to be hungry, and I know what it is to be in abundance." Like, I can say that, right now I'm very well taken care of through the jobs that I've done over the years. I work even with New Breed. I'm not full-time on staff, not yet. I'll go full-time this year for the first time. But all that to say, fundraising is something that to push the mission you have to do, and I don't think any of us like it. I absolutely hate fundraising, and I'm terrible at it. I have a chapter on it in the book. I borrowed everybody else's wisdom that I do not follow. I'm just terrible at raising funds. But the only thing that's ever driven me to do it is my love for the lost. And what I would say is Robin Hood. Robin Hood was a turning point for me where it says he's going to rob the rich and give to the poor. From a mission standpoint, there was a point at which I remember I never asked for money. I would go preach, and my mission board would show up at this big church in Southern California, had a ton of money, and I wouldn't say anything about New Breed. And I would just preach the gospel, and then they would be so frustrated afterwards and say, "Peyton, you didn't do anything. Like that was an opportunity," and it was, and I blew it. And I was like, "Well, they asked me to preach," and they're like, "No, Peyton, they set these appointments up, and they're like, you were supposed to talk to them about the mission." And I just couldn't bring myself to do that back then. And it all changed. It all changed at a certain point where we really started reaching lost people. And I was working another job, but I just remember going, you know what? If we're going to really reach more, because we started planting out other churches, I was like, if we're really going to do this, I'm going to start looking as Robin Hood. There's an abundance of resources in the States, and there's not on the mission front in these other parts of the world. I'm going to start being Robin Hood. And with New Breed's global focus, it's just been going nuts. We always knew that we'd have a global focus. We didn't start in America, but it's just gone nuts. So I hope that kind of encourages any of you that have a hard time fundraising, because I think most of us that are apostolic, we don't do this ever. We do it for free, all day, every day, because it's how God wired us. We're more consumed with the glory of Jesus than anything. But that is just something that you, like Paul, you learn to do. And you've probably heard me say this. I wrote it in Plantology, but where Paul really asks for funds with the Corinthians to propel him on his other missionary journey, he scholars say it is his most belabored Greek it is obvious that Paul is struggling how and what to write at that point, but the necessity was there. So, anyways, hopefully, that will help. So, we don't have any more questions, and we're out. We don't have any more time. So I just want to encourage you guys. Since you're on this call, I'm going to ask you guys. I'm not going to name him, but there's been somebody I've been discipling that I was going to be leaving here in about 30 minutes to go disciple, and he's going through a rough time. I'm just going to ask, will you guys just knowing the power of prayer? There's 15 of you that can really pray for him. If you guys could really pray for him, just real stuff here, just really pray for him. It's frontline stuff, and it needs that. So I'm just gonna not connected at all with what we're doing, but hey, we're missionaries, right? This is real stuff. This is what we do. So I want to thank you guys for coming on. And anyways, guys, we'll see you next time. Be sure to go to New Breed and check out our resources, check out our courses. The tool that you want for this is free. And I'm going to ask Brooks. I don't know that we've actually posted and released it yet. It may be coming out this month. So Brooks, I don't know if you want to confirm that in the chat. Let us know if it's coming out today or if it's coming out another time. So, all right. Okay, great. All right, guys, then we will see you later. Thanks for joining us today. All right, bye-bye.